The listing was posted in a private forum for seasonal caretakers, the kind of site where people trade winter watchman jobs and remote lighthouse postings and the occasional oil platform gig nobody wants. It said property watch position, Central Colorado, 2 persons required, 6-week contract, compensation $19,000. I read it twice before I believed the number. My friend Dale had done caretaking work before, a summer at a fire lookout in Idaho, and he was the one who told me 2 people always got hired for these jobs when the pay was that high, because the owners had learned at some point that 1 person alone would not make it the full 6 weeks. We applied together. The response came 4 days later from a man who signed his emails only as R. Holt. He asked for references, for proof we could handle isolation, for a phone interview that lasted 11 minutes and consisted almost entirely of him asking whether we were the kind of people who followed instructions exactly as written, even when the instructions did not make sense to us. Dale said yes, I said yes. Holt said we would hear back within the week. We heard back in 2 days. The contract was for a property above 9,000 feet, past the end of a county road that stopped being plowed in November, accessible after that only by snowmobile or on foot with snowshoes. The cabin belonged to a family trust that Holt managed on behalf of, his words, absentee owners who preferred not to be named. Our job was to keep the generator running, keep the pipes from freezing, log the weather twice daily, and follow a set of site rules that would be provided on arrival. 6 weeks, mid-December through the end of January, half the payment up front, half on completion. We drove up on the 9th of December. The last stretch of road was gravel, and then not even that, just packed snow with 2 ruts worn into it by whatever vehicle had gone up before us. Holt met us at a trailhead parking area with a snowmobile and a sled trailer for our gear. He was younger than his voice on the phone had suggested, maybe 40, with the specific kind of sunburn that comes from years at altitude rather than beaches. He did not offer to shake hands. He looked at both of us for a long moment like he was recalculating something, and then he told us to load the sled. The ride up took 40 minutes. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded on 3 sides by dense spruce, with the 4th side opening onto a slope that dropped away toward a frozen creek bed maybe 400 feet below. It was a solid structure, log construction with a metal roof, larger than I expected, with a covered porch running the full width of the front. A second, smaller building stood about 60 yards to the north, windowless, padlocked. Holt called it the equipment shed and did not offer to show us inside. He walked us through the main cabin first. Propane heat, a wood stove as backup, a hand-crank radio, a satellite phone for emergencies only, a pantry stocked for 6 weeks plus a 2-week buffer. Then he set a black binder on the kitchen table, 3 inches thick, and told us that everything we needed to know was inside it, but that the first 7 pages were the only part that actually mattered, and he wanted us to read them out loud together before he left. I remember exactly what the first page said, because Dale read it and I followed along, and neither of us said anything when he finished. Rule 1. Between the hours of 10 at night and 5 in the morning, do not open the front door for any reason, regardless of what you hear outside, regardless of who you believe is speaking, regardless of any voice that identifies itself as Holt, as emergency services, or as either of you. Rule 2. Every night before 10, count the logs stacked on the porch. Write the number in the logbook. If the number is higher the following morning than it was the night before, do not burn any of the new logs. Move them to the equipment shed exterior wall and leave them there. Rule 3. The 2 of you are never to sleep in separate rooms at the same time. If one of you is awake, the other must be in the same room even if sleeping. Rule 4. If you hear 3 knocks on any exterior wall, do not respond verbally and do not knock back. If you hear 4 knocks, you may knock back once. Rule 5. The trail marker at the tree line, the one with the strip of orange tape, must be checked every morning at first light. If the tape has moved position on the tree, do not approach the tree line further than the marker that day. Rule 6. Do not use each other's names after dark. Use the terms assigned to you in this binder. Your term is marker 1. Your friend's term is marker 2. Rule 7. If at any point only one of you remains at the cabin, radio out immediately, then leave the property on foot, following the marked trail south without stopping, without returning for belongings, and without looking back toward the cabin. Holt watched us finish reading and asked if we had questions. Dale asked what would happen if we broke a rule. Holt said the trust had never had that problem with caretakers who read carefully, and that the binder had further instructions for weather logging and generator maintenance starting on page 8, and that was the end of the conversation. He left before dark. We watched the sound of the snowmobile fade down the ridge until there was nothing but wind moving through the spruce. The first 4 nights were quiet. We split the woodpile counting and the marker checks between us, kept a fire going, played cards, took turns on the radio log. On the fifth night, I counted the porch logs before 10, wrote down 31 in the book, and went to bed in the same room as Dale like the rules said. In the morning, I went out to check the marker tape and counted the logs on the way back, 34. I didn't tell Dale right away. I moved the extra 3 logs myself, stacked them against the equipment shed's outer wall exactly like the rule said, and only told him over coffee that the count had changed. He didn't ask where the extra wood had come from. Neither of us said it out loud, but I think we both understood the question wasn't where it came from. It was who had carried it there up a snow-covered slope in the dark without either of us hearing it. We kept the fourth wall of the equipment shed in view from the kitchen window after that. By the second week, there were 11 logs stacked against it that we hadn't put there ourselves. The knocking started on night 9. 3 knocks against the north wall, evenly spaced, the kind of sound a gloved fist makes against thick logs. We sat still, said nothing, did not knock back. It came again an hour later. 3 knocks, same wall. Then, close to 2 in the morning, 4 knocks against the same spot. Dale looked at me and I understood what the rule allowed. He reached over without a word and knocked once against the inside of the wall. The response was immediate, 4 knocks again from outside, and then nothing for the rest of the night. We didn't talk about it in the morning. We checked the marker instead. The orange tape had moved 11 inches down the trunk, low enough now that a person standing at normal height wouldn't need to reach up to touch it. We didn't go past it that day. We didn't go past it any day after that either. Around the middle of the 3rd week, Dale started sleeping badly. He would sit up at strange hours, listening, and once I woke to find him standing at the window with the curtain pulled back an inch, watching the tree line. I asked him what he was looking at. He said he thought he had heard his own name, said clearly, from somewhere out past the marker tree, in a voice that sounded almost exactly like mine. I reminded him of Rule 6. We had not used each other's names after dark since the 2nd night. He knew that. That was the part that unsettled him more than the sound itself. Somewhere around day 20, we started noticing something about the snow itself. Every morning after a fresh fall, there would be a single set of tracks leading from the tree line to the equipment shed and back again. Boot prints, evenly spaced, the stride of someone walking at a normal, unhurried pace. Neither of us had made them. We measured the length of the print against Dale's own boot on the 4th morning we found them, just to rule out the obvious explanation, and it was nearly 2 inches longer, front to heel, than anything either of us was wearing. The tracks never once deviated from that same line between the tree line and the shed, no matter how deep the new snow was, no matter which direction the wind had been blowing the night before. We stopped mentioning it out loud after the 1st week of it, the way you stop mentioning a leak once you've accepted the bucket underneath it is doing its job. We used the satellite phone once on the 22nd day to try to reach Holt with a question about the generator. A recorded voice picked up instead, told us the number was not accepting calls at this time, and disconnected. We tried twice more over the following days with the same result. After that we stopped trying and just kept logging the weather like the binder asked, because there was nothing else productive to do with the hours. It was on day 26 that a man came up the trail on foot, mid-afternoon, moving slowly through knee-deep snow without snowshoes, wearing a park uniform jacket that didn't match anything either of us had seen locally. He stopped at the marker tree on the correct side of it and called out that he was a ranger doing a welfare check on remote properties before a storm system moved in. He asked to come inside and warm up. Dale wanted to let him in. I found myself remembering Rule 1, remembering that it said any voice, and I told Dale we should ask him to wait on the porch instead, that we'd bring coffee out to him. Dale thought I was being paranoid. The man on the trail said that was fine, entirely understandable, and that he'd just wait right there by the marker until we were ready. When I came back out 5 minutes later with 2 mugs of coffee, there was no one at the marker tree. There were no footprints leading away from it either, in either direction, in snow that had not been disturbed anywhere else. Dale and I stood on the porch a long time before either of us said anything. That night, for the first time, I broke Rule 3 without meaning to. I fell asleep in the kitchen chair while Dale was outside checking the generator fuel level, and by the time I woke he was still gone, the door standing open, cold air pouring into the cabin, no sign of him on the porch or the steps. I remembered Rule 7. I remembered it clearly, the words about radioing out and walking south without stopping and without looking back, and I sat there in the doorway for almost 20 minutes unable to make myself do either thing the rule required, calling his name into the dark instead, which the 6th rule had told us months' worth of nights ago never to do. He came back on his own close to an hour later, walking up from the direction of the equipment shed, saying he'd heard something moving near the woodpile and gone to check it. He didn't remember hearing me call his name, though I know I said it more than a dozen times standing in that doorway. He didn't remember much about the hour at all. He was cold enough that his hands had gone the color of the snow, and there was a mark on the equipment shed's padlock, a fresh scratch across the hasp that neither of us could explain. We did not go near the equipment shed again unless the fuel gauge on the generator required it, and even then only during daylight and only together. The boot prints kept appearing after that night, the same even stride between the tree line and the shed, but the count started changing along with the wood. Where there had always been exactly one line of prints leading out and one leading back, on the morning after Dale's missing hour there were two full sets, walking the same path side by side, as if whoever had been making that walk for 3 weeks had, on that particular night, brought company. We never found a third set again after that, only ever the original two, but Dale stopped sleeping through the night entirely after seeing it, and I started keeping the hatchet from the woodpile within reach of the bed, which was against no written rule, but felt, at the time, like the only sensible thing left to do. Holt came back up on the property once more on the 39th day, unannounced, on the same snowmobile. He didn't apologize for the silence on the phone. He asked how the counts had been running, and I told him honestly, 31 the first month, then higher, then steadying out around 42 and holding. He nodded like the number meant something specific to him. I asked him directly what the extra wood was, who was bringing it, why the rules existed at all. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer, and then he said one thing, only one, before changing the subject to the storm forecast for the following week. He said the rules weren't there to keep something out, they were there to keep it counted. That was the only explanation we ever got, and neither of us asked him to say more, because something about the way he said it made it clear that was the entire answer, and that pushing further would only tell him something about us he didn't need to know. The last week was quiet in the specific way that made the quiet itself feel like a held breath. The knocking stopped. The tape on the marker tree didn't move again. The wood count held steady at 42 every single morning, the same 42 logs against the shed wall, never one more, never one less, as if whatever had been adding to the pile had finished whatever it needed 42 logs for and simply stopped. We left on schedule on the 58th day, meeting Holt at the trailhead with our gear loaded on the sled. He paid the second half in cash, thanked us for following the rules, and asked, almost as an afterthought, whether we'd be willing to do it again next winter. Dale said maybe. I didn't answer at all. Before we left the cabin that last morning, the binder asked us to do one more thing, something the first 7 pages hadn't mentioned, but that appeared further in, on a page we only found because we finally read the whole thing cover to cover on our final night. It asked us to write our own account of the 6 weeks in our own words and leave it inside the binder for whoever came next. It said the account should include every rule, every count, every night the wood pile changed, so that the next 2 people would understand exactly what they were agreeing to before the 10 o'clock hour on their first night alone up there. I wrote it out at the kitchen table while Dale packed the truck. I wrote down all 7 rules exactly as Holt had given them to us. I wrote down the count of 42, and the marker tape, and the knocking, and the man at the tree line who left no footprints, and the hour Dale went missing by the shed. I did not write down what Holt said about the rules keeping something counted, because I didn't know how to phrase it in a way that wouldn't make the next people close the binder and walk straight back down the mountain, and some part of me understood that wasn't the point of the page. I closed the binder, left it on the kitchen table exactly where Holt had first set it down for us, and walked out to the truck without looking back toward the equipment shed. Somewhere above 9,000 feet, in a cabin surrounded by spruce on 3 sides, that binder is still sitting closed on the table, exactly as we left it, waiting for the next 2 people willing to sign a 6-week contract, and read all 7 rules out loud together, carefully, before the sun goes all the way down on their very first night.